When you've been in this business as long as I've been and talked to companies about their leaders coaching and, salespeople practicing and customer service people really learning how to handle angry customers. Do you know what always hits me that's funny? And it happens in every industry we go into. There's an immediate pushback to the outsider. And I understand that. I have the same thing, quite frankly. But when people come in, it's always interesting to a meeting and they meet someone like myself or someone in my business. And we're often coined as, the magical help. Uh, in the first rebuttals I get are, well, have you ever been in our industry? Do you know much about our industry? And I don't think the questions are truly inquisitive. I think they're truly meant to somewhat derail or maybe even undermine the authority or the subject matter expertise, whatever you want to call it. And it really goes systemically to people don't want to look in the mirror. Let me give you a quick example, and then I'm going to get into a lesson in how you can go about cultivating organizational self awareness, literally. So, this happens all the time. And I actually years ago made a decision. I'm not going to work with sales organizations. I'm not going to work with sales teams. I go back to one of my first major clients over 25 plus years ago, Evan New Johnson. I worked with the Parts and Accessory Group, worked with a great guy by the name of Tom Wally and Dean DeVore. We had a ton of success, numbers up. Then I get into the sales area, and it is pushback city. Well, you don't understand the E-Tech engine. You don't understand. Your sales are low. You don't need my help. You might need some help. But if your first reaction is to discount someone who can help you, what causes that? And it is the number one barrier I think we have in individual development. Now, I think Tasha Eurich would agree with me because she wrote, I think, still one of the best books. It's a New York Times bestseller called Insight. And she talks about self-awareness, that 95% of the people in her survey said, yes, I'm highly self-aware. When she tested them, only 10% of those people were. That means 85% of people who think they're highly self-aware significantly lack self-awareness. Think about that. If you're a leader with 10 people, 8.5 are going to reject your feedback just based on statistics. It makes it tough, right? So we hear it all the time. We see it in the press all the time. You think about some of the events that happen where one side of the political landscape says, no, this happened. The same people who see the same video say, no, this happened. And they are just totally opposite. We can almost trick ourselves into seeing things or feeling things about ourselves. I want to give you an example. And this just happened about 60 days ago. I was brought into a meeting and probably will not represent myself well, but I'm being honest. And I had a VP of sales. And this happens all the time. This is not unique. And said, well, do you have any industry experience? I said, like what, in this industry? And I said, no. And they said, oh, okay. And they laughed. This story happens all the time. Sometimes people come to me and say, are you telling the same story over and over? I go, no, it's the same story in different industries. And I looked at him and I said, hey, look, I've done this a long time. Don't hire me. Don't even listen to me. You go on your way. I'll go on my way. I started packing up. The guy goes, wow, you're a little defensive. I said, no, I'm not defensive. Did you ask that question for what reason? Be honest with me. Be honest with me. He goes, well, I've had you sales trainers come in here before. I go, I'm not a sales trainer. That's not what I do. So you've already made an assumption. That's why I want to pack up and leave, because you already have the answers. But I was brought here for a reason, because your margins are low, your sales are low. Can you handle that? And he looked at me and all of a sudden the behavior changed. He said, I don't have industry experience, but guess what? I have no debt. My sales are up. So how are your sales doing? You want to play the game? I can play it. Now, it's not a great representation of myself, but what I wanted to do is get him to see you're immediately pushing back. I said, what I do is I help leaders like you find ways to coach people so your numbers go up, not my numbers, your numbers. And your first reaction was to immediately undermine and assume things about me. Would you call that great leadership? And he goes, no, fair enough. And I said, hey, look, I'm not trying to come on strong, but this is what I get. Your sales are low. Your margins are low. Your president's going to ask me how this meeting went. I can just tell him, I said, guy's a jerk. Think he has all the answers. Wouldn't even let me get a word in edgewise. I said, I can make assumptions too, but that doesn't get us anywhere. What's really going on here? Complete behavioral change. He goes, scary times. Our margins are low. Our marketplace is shrinking. I'm not going to mention the industry or the company, certainly. And it's in a part of the industry where things are still being done overseas, even with the tariffs. And I said, okay. And I said, well, who do you sell to? And he said, well, we have a network of dealers. And I said, well, okay. I said, what is the account rep's responsibility out in the field? And he starts telling me. I said, okay. I said, how would you characterize your dealer's ability to sell? He goes, oh my gosh, their turnover is so huge and blah, blah, blah. So after about an hour, and I said, have you ever thought about doing like seminars about your products and actually held them at the dealer sites? And he goes, well, we do product training. I said, that's not what I asked you. Have you ever done it in front of the end user customer? He goes, we haven't. That's a really interesting idea. Now I'm going to stop there. So I spent an hour with a person, and what was his battle? Going from true self-awareness or the lack thereof to reality. Your reality is your sales are in the toilet, your margins are eroding. You're doing the same old. The account executives are going out there saying, where are your sales? We got to hit our numbers. Have you changed that? He said, no, that's been pretty traditional here for decades. I said, okay. So now you're doing the same thing and you're not getting the results that maybe historically you got. So what needs to change? He goes, I think probably our relationship with our dealers. I go, to change that relationship, what needs to change with your account executives? He said, they've got to be a lot better at product. If we're going to do something like you suggested. I said, well, that was just an idea. And he said, no. He goes, I like the idea. So we're at 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Now, do I think he's highly self-aware? No. So when we don't look in the mirror, we make assumptions, we distort things, we move beyond solutions that might be right in front of us. So how do we as individuals cultivate self-awareness? Now, first of all, I am all for assessments. I am agnostic when it comes to assessment. So I'm certified in the Motivator, a great company called Find Mojo. I'm certified in DISC by 24 Assessments, great company. I'm certified by MHS for EQI 2.0, an emotional intelligence assessment. Okay. I'm certified in all those. We do the assessment, we do the debrief, we sit down, maybe we draw up a plan, and that's kind of it. So what we've actually done for self-awareness is we've uncovered a solution that actually I just had a CEO bring up to me, and she didn't even know she was bringing it up. And she said, how do we keep this going? How do we get someone to really look at themselves? And I said, it's tough. Now, I believe that we should always go to our bosses and ask for feedback, and teammates and people in other departments. But also time can become a really big barrier. And 360s, which I'm a fan of, I'm certified in 360s. The challenge with 360s is, as someone who's always on the 50-yard line, the person who doesn't live inside the company, sometimes I think I see things that go on inside companies better than people inside their own companies see. So something interesting happened. When you see a 360 being conducted, I will hear people talk. Yeah, I got this comment. I wonder who said that. They immediately gravitate to who said it? Why did they say it? Not to what was said and what can I learn from it? Now that's facilitated. It's usually done once a year, and it becomes this apparatus of, building self-awareness. You're going to look in the mirror. This is about self-improvement. You're going to get really good, objective, anonymous feedback from your peers. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm actually all for 360s. What we found, though, is what if people were in charge of their own self-awareness? It's a little oxymoronic. What if people were in charge of their own self-awareness by driving their own self-awareness? Let me explain. So the F10 stands for feedback 10. It basically means for every 10 sets of feedback, you'll get some insight to how you're perceived, whether it be from friends, family, coworkers, subordinates, bosses, leaders from other parts of the company and other departments. And so here's how it works. We literally give somebody a link that they get to send out to people of their choosing. That's the magic sauce. I know that's corny. That's the magic sauce. I'm now inviting people of my choosing, which means I become a little bit more accepting of the feedback. That's what's one of the cool things about what we've created. So, why it works is to get people the ultimate goal of truly practicing self awareness, not doing an assessment. Doing a one off assessment does not suffice, it does not solve anything. A moment at time, it gives us some insight, a glimmer of what we need to improve. But how do we make that ongoing? So, what we've actually done with the F10 assessment is something very unique. Here's how the process works. We've created a whole series of coaching questions that somebody will send out. They'll have their own link unique to their name. They'll send it out to 15, 20, 25 people and say, we give the email templates, we give all the communication that they need to do to send it out. And then they sit back. They get their own private URL. So as the results come in, they start to get educated on how they're perceived. So I had never thought about doing this until I talked to this one client, and she said, how do you keep that going? I said, in theory, we could keep the URL open. We could have this person continually send this out to people. And she goes, boy, I like that. It's almost like an ongoing 360. I said, yeah, it's kind of like an open 360. I've never thought of it that way. So if you're looking for a way to truly cultivate organizational self-awareness, there's one thing or a couple of things I would encourage. One, try out the F10. Number two, keep it open for a while. Number three, what we do is we take the results, immediately put it into our AI tool that will design a coaching plan for that person's leader and for the person to develop themselves in a self-coaching plan. The other thing that we do is we take these, we start to look at the organization as a whole. So think about your organization. Think about people in your organization that where leaders are lacking self-awareness. I will tell you one of the toughest jobs we don't talk enough about are human resource leaders. See, often it swims downstream to the principal's office. Well, I got to write up John. I got to write up Lisa. And have they been coaching? Have they been mentoring? Have they been developing talent? Have they been giving really good strength-based feedback as well as constructive feedback? What does the HR person truly inherit? Do they inherit someone where the manager's done everything in their power? Or have they inherited someone in the first inning where the manager really hasn't done much? Now it puts the manager in this very weird, precarious triangle relationship between the leader and the employee. What if people were constantly learning about themselves, how they're perceived? What if people literally went from this resistant, I know it all, my people love me, to I've got to get better at this. And I'm going to converse more. And see, when we invite feedback and we have a positive response to that feedback, do you know what people are willing to do? Continue to give us feedback. I say this to people all the time. When you get silence, you should be terrified. If you don't get feedback from your boss or your coworkers, you should be terrified. That might mean that they gave up on you or you're so resistant, what's the use? So what's the benefit? What's the impact of an F10? The F10 allows you to continually not only monitor, but cultivate self-awareness. Where there's self-awareness, right around the corner is pursuit of personal improvement. It happens like that. If 7 out of 10 people say you seem to be resistant to feedback, or when you have conversations of conflict, you tend to raise your voice and I'm not comfortable. I'm now conditioned to realize I got to have better communication. I got to handle conflict better. And what we do is we take those results, we put them right into our AI engine, and out comes a self-coaching plan. Things people can do on their own, as well as things that their direct manager can do to assist them. The F10 assessment, building out organizational self-awareness, literally has to be an ongoing pursuit. I think about our school systems. I'm not against, my kids went to great schools. My daughter went to a private college. My son went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They both went to Cedarburg High School, probably one of the top 3 high schools in Wisconsin. But I go back to, where do we cultivate emotional intelligence? I think the first tenet of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. When you become self-aware, everything changes because you start to adjust. You start to adjust the way you perceive yourself but you start to adjust your behaviors, your approaches, the way you communicate, the way you handle disagreement with people. So when I got certified in emotional intelligence, part of my self-awareness journey was my 2 low scores were impulse control. Now that's from some form of ADD, but I have to slow down. I can't be interruptive and disruptive, even though it's a great idea. And I do that. My other low score is empathy. And I'm not embarrassed by it, but it's a low score. I've always not been a very empathetic person. Do I think empathy is important? Yeah. Do I think it's something that really should be practiced? Absolutely. And I do. Do I think I'm at the highest degree of empathy right now? Not a chance. So this isn't about perfection. It's about truly opening the door. Think about if every employee at your company improved their self-awareness by 30%. What's your first reaction right now? How did you feel? What if your team had a higher degree of self-awareness and they were constantly practicing self-awareness? What's your first emotional thought right now or feeling? What if your leaders became more aware of how they're perceived and they navigated, adjusted their leadership accordingly to build more collaborative, cooperative teams? What's your emotional feeling right now? If it was positive, that might mean that there's a gap. So do me a favor. If you're intrigued by this, let us know. The methodology is very easy to set up. If you want, you are free to put into or DM me, and you want to send a direct message saying F10, I will give you an F10 assessment for free. Now, we typically charge, depending on the organization, depending on the length of the F10. So sometimes people say, well, we'll do it for 90 days and that's it. Some people say, we want to do it quarterly, so we want to do a yearly, 4 times a year F10 assessment per leader. Every client is different. If you want to DM me, I will literally give you an F10 assessment for free. Just choose one person that you think it would be meaningful, and then we will set you up, and then we'll go from there. Thanks, everybody. Let me know your thoughts.